So what I want to do in this video is I want to talk about the downswing mistake that I keep seeing amateur golfers making. Now, when we see professional golfers, or when you see good golfers, what you'll tend to see is obviously the through swing position. So whether somebody finishes this way or whether somebody finishes this way, although I've done two different movements, the finished position looks identical. Now what often happens is that, your golf swing might feel good, and people might say, yeah, it looks, good and smooth and all the rest of it. But then, I don't know, you might go and have a golf lesson or something might get flagged up in your golf swing which promotes you to video your own swing, and then you start to notice, oh, hang on a second, my arms are way behind my body and I'm really quite flicky and scoopy, and that's not what the pros are doing. And that's what I want to talk about. This is the mistake that amateur golfers, I would say, in a high proportion make. And when I'm working with students, this is a big thing that I'm always trying to get them to work on and improve. So the big difference between the two is it comes in towards the transition, which is the start of the downswing. And I'm just going to I'll stand face on. And what we're going to do is I'm going to draw a line vertically through my body. Now, what happens with the golfer who gets the transition wrong is they move their trail hip forward first. So they're sort of, for me, a right-handed golfer, their right hip moves forward, like so. Now, what happens with this type of motion is a couple of things. One, my right shoulder also moves forward. And two, is it shoves my hands out in front of me. So even if this golfer tries to, and I see this a lot with students, they try and kind of move to the left, because they know this, but they're still moving this. See the way now my head moves, and then they get really sort of trapped and quite spinny. So from the side-on perspective, this again is the same fault. The trail hip moves forward. Now this time I've drawn a line on the back of my hips. So can you see the way that this hip moves forward? Again, my hands work out in front of me. Or I might see a student whose hands don't, and they end up pulling down this way and they get stuck. And again, this isn't something that you want to be doing anyway. You don't want to be in this position because, again, if your hands work too much this way, then it impacts, you're going to get stuck and too flicky. So understanding the transitional motion is absolutely vital, because fundamentally all that's happening when you start the downswing is your arms are sort of just dropping down towards the side of your body. But the reason why some golfers look this way or this way is to do with the pivot, not necessarily so much of a fault of what they're doing necessarily with the hands. So we go back to this vertical line. What we want to be doing is, instead of my right hip moving forward, I want to pull my left hip back. But if we do this ultra slow, it's not my left hip moving back this way to the center line, it's my left hip being pulled back towards my lead leg, like so. And what you can see, the difference when I do this slowly, is can you see the way that my pelvis is basically progressively moving towards my lead side as I pull the left side back. And this time you can see the way that my shoulder starts to drop down. And as my trail shoulder drops down, my hands can drop more down. So from the side-on perspective, what we can now see is if I pivot correctly, see the way my right shoulder drops down, and therefore so do my hands, which drops the club nicely on play, and it keeps my hands in front of my body, so I can now look like so, as opposed to somebody who would pivot more this way where the hands get more stuck because they're fighting that pivoting action. So it's a real thing, and I've noticed this for years. For those of you that have watched the channel in the early stages, I used to talk a lot about the pivoting action. And what I've done over more recent times is, rather than just always talking about the pivoting action, I've tried to play different narratives, different feelings to try and encourage the pivot to work well, and that's worked well with students. But what I've also done recently is I've set up a membership site. And if any of you are ever interested, you should go onto my website and have a little look, because all I've done there is I've created video content around 5 fundamentals. And the 5 fundamentals being the basics in terms of how you set up. And then I've got swing plane in terms of how the club's obviously moving to the side of the body. We have the conversation of pivot, which is a big one, conversation of width, and the conversation around sequence. And those are also broken up into another subject area, which is the backswing, the transition, and impact. So today's conversation is very much the transitional pivoting action, which is obviously vital, which is why I've created half a dozen videos on that with different drills and exercises. So if you're interested, there's also the opportunity where you can send swings into myself to get analysis as part of that program as well. But it really is a big thing. It's a big thing that you need to be thinking about. And one of my favorite sort of drills, if you're now thinking, well, how do I go away and work on that, is get yourself up against the wall at home. Okay, start building in an element of conscious competence. So swing back, get your trail hip on the wall. So when you go up against the wall at home, fist distance away, then into your posture. Get your trail hip on the wall, and then as you start the downswing, you're going to pull your lead hip back. But as you pull your lead hip back, you want to be telling yourself, right, I'm going to pull my lead hip back, but I'm equally going to shift my pressure towards that lead side like so, instead of like this. And the beauty, I think, of telling yourself lead hip back is once you get that transition much better, then from this position, you just let that lead hip move back again. Then that lead leg will start to straighten, and you'll be able to trigger this sort of through swing position like so. So it's such a key thing to understanding how to move correctly. So much so that I'm really hoping that this video relates, gets you sort of quite thought-provoked. And what I would do, as I suggest to a lot of my students, is just do some conscious competence first. Do some drills in and around the house where you're just working on that sort of feeling of how to pull that lead hip back and get that feedback. And then you can start to progress, taking it to the range and hitting some shots. Let me know how you get on.